Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Shani Shoam, and I have the pleasure of moderating this webinar. I can tell you we had a very interesting prep session last week. There's going to be a lot of opinions. There's going to be some disagreements and some very interesting perspectives from these three gentlemen based on the experience with the companies like Uber, Meta, and others. So I'm excited about this webinar. We'll get started in just a minute. I'm calling from California. I'd love to get to know the audience a little bit. So just put in the chat where you're calling from, just so we can learn a little more about you. Jonathan, Bob, Don, welcome to today's webinar. Where are you guys calling from?
Seattle.
Seattle, okay.
Downtown Seattle.
And Jonathan, Bob, same location?
I'm also located in Seattle. We all met at an in-person Seattle event a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's kind of what got this webinar started, is the discussion we had back at the Engineering Leaders Forum. So, okay, we have James from London. We have a gentleman from India. Any other locations? India, Mumbai, Delhi. Tell us more from which location in India, Nikhil?
I'm trying to think. It's must be around 8 p.m. in the evening in India right now. So we're getting the evening crowd.
I would think it's actually more like 10 or 10:30 p.m. So it's pretty late. But I see that we have quite a few folks from India. Any other locations in Europe? Bangalore, perfect. Hyderabad, Gurgaon, Bangalore, Delhi. I don't think we have a strong representation of the US or Europe. Anyone from Europe? I think we saw James from London, but anyone else? Oh yeah, it's 9:30. Okay, perfect.
That's what I remember. India has the half-hour time zone difference.
Yeah. Okay, we have Arun from Amsterdam. Hey, Arun. Perfect. Well, I think we'll get started. Actually, gonna make sure that we can see everyone. So again, welcome to today's webinar. For those who just joined, again, this is going to be a very lively discussion. We only have 2 slides, but most of it, again, is going to be a fireside chat. We did a preparation for this webinar last week, and I can tell you these gentlemen have tons of knowledge and very interesting perspectives, and so and definitely strong opinions. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Don, maybe we'll start with you. Do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for inviting me here, Shani. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Smith. I joined LendingTree back in 2018. A quick overview of LendingTree. We're a comparison shopping service for all kinds of financial products. I work in the insurance division of the company. We help people shop for auto, home, health, life insurance. If you go to LendingTree.com and choose insurance, you'll be entering my world. Anyway, I started back in 2018 as the Senior Director of Data Services in our insurance division, but my role has transitioned over the years to Senior Director of Software Engineering for our insurance division. I have over 25 years or so of software development experience and data warehousing, spanning telecom, social media, e-commerce, gaming, and performance marketing industries. My other interests include adventures with my wife and daughters, 2 daughters, dirt bikes, golfing, hiking, sometimes all in the same weekend.
Cool. Don, thanks for joining, and I sympathize with the 2 daughters, so a lot of drama in the house, I assume. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in engineering leadership capacities for more than 15 years across Microsoft, Meta, Indeed, a startup called Department List. And I most recently just joined Axon as an engineering director. Axon builds software for police agencies. So for example, when you call in for, make a 911 call and need police assistance, it's our software that helps dispatch it and provide the software that's inside the police vehicles and the body cameras and helping with that police coordinated response. Our software serves police agencies in it's dozens of countries around the world. So it's an interesting challenge, very different than the types of products I was involved with at Meta, Department List, and Indeed. So it's been an exciting new job that I've just been getting into.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, good luck with your new role. Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Rob Fletcher. Historically, have been an engineer in vulnerability research. So started at Mozilla and Cisco, and then went to Uber, where I led product security for about 6 years, and then transitioned to Facebook at that time, Meta now, and I was leading a large part of the security product security organization. So kind of lived and breathed security most of my career for about the last 15 years. Most recently, co-founder at DevZero, focused on building cloud-based development environments. So it's certainly been interesting to see the other side of engineering. I find I have a lot more empathy for developers now. I think picking apart somebody's code is probably easier than writing something really amazing. So it kind of gives me a unique perspective on both sides of it. So yeah, that's kind of my background. I'm in Seattle. One son that's 2 years old, and besides work and family, I try and throw around heavy weights sometimes. So
awesome. Don, maybe we'll get started with you. So can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you're managing at LendingTree? Like how many engineers? How is the organization distributed, etc.?
Sure, happy to share. So we have 8 dev teams supporting our 3 main products in the insurance division, like I mentioned, with about 30 engineers across those teams, all onshore, but a mix of on-site and remote employees. Our teams are mostly aligned to a single platform each, but over the past couple of years, we've seen our projects become more complex and often requiring changes to multiple platforms at a time. Our initial response was just to manage those cross-team dependencies for the projects, but that required a lot more planning and coordination overhead. So we asked ourselves, how could we improve on this? And over the past year, we began adopting a more cross-functional or cross-platform mindset. We try to break down some of those silos and then really empower teams to own projects completely across platforms. And it's not been an easy shift. It's required a lot of learning, but thanks to the smart and dedicated people we have, we've seen it pay dividends again and again already.
Awesome. So since this webinar is about metrics, tell us a little bit about kind of what metrics you look at and how is the organization trending, etc.
Sure. We've implemented the DORA metrics, the DevOps research, something, I can't remember what A stands for measuring stability and throughput. We have change failure rates and mean time to recovery for stability. Yeah, you can show the charts I shared. And for throughputs, we're measuring lead time and deployment frequency. We have these set up in a Power BI dashboard and shared out so anyone in the company can review them. But no joke, it took me a while to wrap my mind around the DORA metrics and to understand the value in them. Once I did, though, I decided I had to have them. They weren't easy to produce in our context, but we eventually got there. And I think the DORA metrics are extremely powerful in that they both show what's happening right now, but they also show where we're going. And I think in a sense, they are predictive of business outcomes even.
How frequently do you look at those dashboards?
I look at these monthly since I'm looking for trends or changes in the trends. Monthly seems like the right frequency. Also, our change failure rate is calculated for the month anyway. We add up all the bug tickets for that month and we divide it by the number of deploys to get our change failure rate, which is, I think you have a slide for that one.
Yes, I do.
It's the next one. Yeah, the orange line there is our change failure rate.
Okay, so you look at them monthly and you're mostly looking at kind of how things are trending?
That's correct.
Awesome, perfect. Jonathan, same question. So what metrics do you look for at your organization and how frequently do you look at those?
Sure. Well, I can give a quick description of my team. So my team size is between 40 and 45 engineers. It's split between half of them are based in the US. We're a remote first company, so they're spread around the US. And then the other half is located in our dev center in Vietnam. It's the first time I've had a dev center in Vietnam, like when I worked at Microsoft, a bunch of developers in India, but Vietnam has been a new interesting one. My current company, Axon, we pay a lot of attention to project delivery metrics. So like project management, how are we progressing on a project, so we delivering against our roadmap. We also pay a lot of attention to the quality and operational aspects. Like it's because our software is in that kind of mission critical category, it's really, really big deal if we have any outages or bugs in our software. So we pay very close attention to those. One of the things that we're making a push on right now is how to keep improving that quality and operational excellence even further. So something I'm introducing into the team is more proactive reliability metrics. Like one I love in particular is tracking just what I call pre-mortem exercises to proactively analyze the system for what could become potential problems. And I like packaging those up as like insurance policies that I can sell to the business to invest in proactively improving reliability risks even further. So some of the tools we use are things like, for operations are things like Ops Genie, Incident.io, Jira, and we check our metrics on a bi-weekly basis. We have a meeting to review them.
Awesome, that's super helpful. And so you mentioned a couple of tools. That's awesome. Don, you're previously a data engineering manager at Big Fish, right? Big Fish Games. Were you measuring things differently? And if so, did it have to do with the fact that the operation was different, the vertical was different? Can you talk a little bit about your prior experience?
Yeah, things were a lot different at Big Fish Games. For one, I hadn't even heard of DORA metrics back then. We were very Scrum focused, which I loved. Primarily, we measured a lot of metrics around each sprint for each team, but we didn't have a way to roll those up to a departmental view. Most sprint metrics wouldn't be appropriate to use outside the Scrum team anyway, which is one reason why I latched onto the DORA metrics, really, because I think they provide an objective view across teams, which is something sprint metrics don't.
Okay, so sounds like DORA gives you an opportunity to go one level down than just like sprint metrics, which is like an overall organization metric.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Jonathan, what's your experience, with prior companies compared to Axon, which you recently joined?
Well, at my prior companies, like I'll give an example of my last one, Apartment List, a lot of focus on business metrics through A/B testing. I mean, Apartment List, everything was effectively a transaction in terms of how we got our revenue. So every change had to go into an A/B test to see how much it modified the transaction and therefore the revenue or the behaviors that lead to moving people down the funnel. So that was the most important metrics, and we reviewed those on a weekly basis, just what were the latest results of the A/B test experiments that we were running. So a very different environment. Like we don't do, like at Axon, we don't do A/B tests of our reliability. We measure, we handle that in a different way.
Awesome. I see some questions filing in, so we'll get to the questions in a little bit. Feel free to post that in the comments, and again, we'll make sure we get to them in a few minutes. Bob, I mean, sounds like Don really loves DORA, and Jonathan as well. But like, is DORA enough?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say I love DORA as well, especially for a zoomed out view. I do find it lacking to get details kind of on an individual level. And I think the common misconception is that's going to be immediately used for things like performance management and stuff like that. And it certainly can, but especially being in an early stage startup, understanding engagement, understanding average lines of code in a diff, which is kind of a transitive measurement of how quickly and thoroughly you can review PRs and things like that, are also really important. And I don't think DORA does a great job capturing that. But I think all of these metrics, you kind of get a view of the world and then have to step back and kind of draw your own conclusions. So I don't look at it as necessarily a bad part about DORA. I just think DORA is a part of that picture, combined with a few other metrics to understand how the team's performing, who's reaching burnout, how do you make sure to connect the right people, and how quickly code is moving through the software development pipeline. So big fan of DORA for what it does. I think there are other metrics that need to be supplemented to give a full picture.
Jonathan, Don, any thoughts on that?
Oh, man. Go ahead, Jonathan.
You have to remember that DORA, this maybe is overstated, but it's kind of a fancy way of saying, do you do continuous deployment? And I'm a big fan of continuous deployment. And if you say, hey, how do you prove you're doing continuous deployment? The DORA metrics are a good way of saying, yes, I'm doing continuous deployment. Here's the metrics that prove it. But I mean, like productivity, I'm seeing the comments in the chat. Productivity is one of the most fundamentally important things for an engineering team. Like as an engineering leader, I obsess about the productivity of the team. And there's nothing about the DORA metrics that really are going to tell you about team productivity or a bunch of other things. So continuous deployment is great. DORA tells you if you're doing continuous deployment, but that is not the full picture to me as an engineering leader of an engineering team's effectiveness.
Look, I'm obviously the DORA advocate here. But I agree, they aren't enough. But they aren't intended to be used for every question either. I think, though, if they're used as intended, they are very effective. An example, the DORA metrics are focused on the activities after code is written, right? But what about all the activities that came before? And that's where I think the product metrics, the sprint metrics are still important to be captured and used, and particularly at a team level. We've also, talked about burnout engagement before, and I think good Scrum Masters know how to measure those things reasonably well and detect those. If you're not doing Scrum, a good dev manager should be able to uncover those things too. And if anyone wants some ideas around that, I'd recommend the book Managing for Happiness by, I think it's Jürgen Appelo, Appelo. Excellent book on team metrics.
Don, you made a comment in the preparation session about kind of effectiveness versus productivity. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a debate, I think, between efficiency and effectiveness. I prefer to focus on effectiveness over efficiency. I think someone once said efficiency is doing something well, but effectiveness is doing the right thing well. And I like that because a focus on effectiveness allows us to consider other goals like quality, like cross-training, risk mitigation, things like that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. So sounds like productivity is, I don't know if I would use the word vanity metric, but it only gives you one side of the story, which is how quickly you're producing stuff, but it doesn't tell you what's the quality of the things that you produce.
Yeah, so on productivity, I think both Martin Fowler and Kent Beck said you can't measure developer productivity. You just can't. It's immeasurable, something like that. And maybe that's partly because it's not defined well. What does productivity even mean? Is it just a measure of busyness? Is it really a return on investment metric? Is that what we're trying to detect there? And I have an example of why I think trying to measure developer productivity is problematic. So in my last year as a staff engineer or principal engineer, before I moved to more of a management track, I did almost zero individual work. Instead, I mostly paired with other engineers.
Yeah.
I was still working in a Scrum team, in sprints, but user stories weren't assigned to me. They were assigned to my teammates. So was I productive? How would you have measured my productivity? You couldn't count user stories closed because they weren't assigned to me. You couldn't count commits because my name wasn't on them. But was the team productive? Yeah, I think we were. And so this idea that we can and should measure an individual's productivity makes me nervous.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? We're talking about people, not machines. And I think software engineering is knowledge work. It's creative work. It's not manufacturing widgets. Plus, and I kind of hinted at this with my example, I think software engineering is a team sport. You have a team of software engineers, ideally, working together to solve problems. So, okay, back to DORA. Maybe this concept of productivity is really a question of whether we can deliver quality software quickly. Do we have that capability as an organization? And this, I think, highlights another aspect of why I like the DORA metrics. You can infer a team's productivity by their stability and throughput.
I have a couple of reactions to that, if it's my turn to respond.
Please.
Okay, so two things. So productivity, I have two ways of defining it. Productivity in delivering software and productivity in delivering business impact. Because you can deliver a lot of software and zero business impact, and you can have a lot of business impact sometimes from one line of code change. Both are valid productivity measurements. One is an efficiency of your product plans, your discovery. The other is maybe raw engineering productivity. However, the holy grail is to be able to scientifically measure developer productivity. I mean, there's been countless ways over the history of software engineering to try to scientifically measure it, and nobody has been successful. I've tried every technique in the book, gummy bears, story points, function points, lines of code, et cetera, et cetera. None of them are any good. All of them are too flawed to be worth trying to do. It's similar to doing estimates. There's no scientific machine process that you can use to generate an estimate. They are all done judgment-based. You have engineers analyze the things and then do a judgment-based thing. To me, productivity has to be measured in the same way, judgment-based. But judgment-based measurements are valid. So I rely on the engineering managers, the technical leads in my team to make judgments about the team productivity, about the productivity of individuals, because they get reviewed on them. They're going to get in their reviews an assessment of their productivity, and it's going to be based upon judgments of the experts. And was it McKinsey that recently famously had a article that said that they'd solved the measurement problem, and everybody read it and just laughed all over it, saying this is ridiculous. Oh, and here's another great example. Ron Jeffries, who invented the concept of story points. Google Ron Jeffries story points, I'm sorry, because he wrote a blog post saying, I believe I invented story points, and if I did, I'm sorry now. Because he recognizes how people overly tried using it for measuring productivity, and it's not scientifically enough. As somebody asked, what's the point of delivering software that creates zero business impact? If it was a good idea, lots of software, it's like, this was a good idea to try, but it didn't work out. That's why you have to sometimes try ideas that don't work out. And that's where, even if it doesn't work out, you still have to judge the delivery productivity independently of the business impact productivity. I'll pause my soapbox there.
Can I jump in with more?
I told you it's gonna be a lively discussion with a lot of opinions, so go ahead, Don, and then I think Bob had a comment.
All right. So Jonathan brought up some terms there and ideas, measuring impact, and we already talked about efficiency and productivity. I think all of these can too easily become the focus or an end goal in themselves. And I think that throws an organization out of balance. And suddenly you'll find you're no longer effective at delivering long-term value for your business. And I think it's like focusing only on revenue growth for a company, but you need both revenue and profits for a sustainable business. To circle back to DORA again. Yeah, I think they're deceptively simple measures, but I think what makes them so powerful is the balance between stability and throughput. And together, they are effective tools. And not only that, there's a dependency on each other that you can't have stability without high throughput. Back to what Jonathan was saying about measuring continuous delivery. Yeah, that's an aspect of it. But through that high throughput, you also get stability. You can't have that stability without high throughput. That's what the DORA group discovered, right? And I think by using these metrics, the question emerges, what are the behaviors or practices, techniques, or automations that will improve one or other of these metrics? And asking questions like, why don't we deploy every week or every day or every hour is a good place to start. Is it the fear of production change? Is it our tooling? Is our testing slow? Do we have some other process that slows us down, like SOX? And I think it's through asking these questions and looking at the data that create the clarity on what we should do to create world-class software engineering organizations.
Awesome. Well, sounds like both you and Jonathan say that you need to combine DORA with some kind of judgment and some context.
Let me throw one example in. DORA is about continuous delivery, and how you measure that. But like DORA is not a big deal at Axon. We don't really use the DORA metrics. And one is we cannot be changing the software that police officers are trying to use to respond to an emergency call. It's like if we change it multiple times a day and suddenly they're like, wait, where did that button go? How do I like find where this person is? That is not acceptable. So we're not trying to increase the velocity of how quickly we're randomizing the software on police officers trying to figure out how to respond to a call. So that's a case where, I mean, DORA and us just like changing the software more frequently is not an explicit goal for us. It's given the nature of business.
Yeah, I think you highlight something really important and often misunderstood about both continuous delivery and what DORA is trying to measure. You know, I say we're measuring our deployments, and that works for our business because we do have a high change rate and we need to deploy software fast. In your case, that's not what you need, right? But there's another aspect of continuous delivery, and that is how quickly can you produce a release candidate? You don't have to deploy it. But what DORA can measure, and in your context, I would suggest that's what you should measure, not the deployments, but how quickly you can produce that release candidate. Because the release candidate tells you it's gone through all of your other processes, your testing, everything's automated there if you're doing it quickly. And we can produce a release candidate every day, every week, every month, whatever makes sense for your business. But you're not necessarily pushing change into production every day, every week either. But it's back to, are we measuring the capability of our org effectively? And I think that's what DORA is good for.
I think, Rob, you had a comment, and then there were some great questions, so I want to try and get to at least one or two of them. So, Rob.
Yeah, it was fun listening to Jonathan and Don talk through that, and I think we're all kind of mind melding a little bit. And an underlying theme that we've talked about previously at the Engineering Leadership Forum and as well as today is like these metrics become a little insidious when they move away from a metric to a goal. And like then people start trying to game some of these metrics and their success and their high performers and things like that. And so I think a really important part of a lot of these metrics is, again, painting a picture for somebody to interpret and draw conclusions and not necessarily setting any one of them as the exact success goal for a given team or an individual or something like that. Because even if people, I don't believe most people would do malicious things to try and game them, but you can start to incentivize behavior that you don't necessarily want to be incentivizing when you say, I want commits to be under 200 lines. Like that starts to have side effects, not necessarily good side effects. And so that's one of the, again, a little bit of the insidious nature of these is like, if you really put them as goals and targets for a team. Now, relative change and saying we want to drive throughput up, that's awesome. But I think you have to be careful about which ones you're really talking about as the main success metrics for especially individuals.
My favorite story around that is one time I put in a metric of a goal of unit test coverage. And the thing that until someone found a tool that could auto-generate your unit tests to cover every path through the code, which all it did was enforce that any bugs in the code, there was a unit test to make sure that bug still existed. Well, then I realized how much metrics can subvert the wrong thing in the software, and I've been really careful about how I try to use metrics ever since that experience.
So I'm going to try and combine two questions from the audience, and again, there's tons of other questions, so we'll try to get to them before the end of this panel. But you guys kind of alluded to what's missing in DORA, which is, I think, like some judgment, etc. But can you talk a little bit more explicitly about that? And specifically, one thing I think DORA is lacking is impact, which is very challenging to measure. So can you also talk about how you measure impact or how you consider impact?
Yeah, I can give it
Well-
a shot.
I'll let
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
anyone join.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to give it a shot. The answer in my head is there's no one answer, which I know is not satisfying. When I think about impact, and again, I think Jonathan talked about it well, and as a co-founder at a startup, it's particularly challenging to understand development, productivity versus business productivity metrics, and if you're really driving impact in both of those areas, especially when, to Jonathan's point, you want to be able to experiment and take risks on something that ends up being a complete waste of time. You want to do that quickly and you want to fail fast, but you never win big by not taking risks like that. And so when thinking about impact, I think it's really important to get a picture of these metrics to understand, especially if you're talking individual impact, how people at certain levels compare to people at other levels. Becomes increasingly difficult the more senior a person is, just because the sample set's smaller and the work's so diverse. But that starts to give you a picture, and then really start to drawing lines from, okay, they did this much work, this connected to this product that shipped. And if you're going to go all the way to the end, how much did that product drive signups or drive revenue or really change what the business is offering, and things like that. So I don't believe that there's a single metric in a dashboard that's going to be able to give you a good measure of impact for an individual or a team. That's my opinion. Don't know if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, this reminds me of an example we had here a few years ago. We had an idea for a new product, a new line of business. We assembled a great development team and product team around it, and we went crazy building out this new software platform, and it was cool. We wrote some good software, but what was missing was that more rapid feedback of testing. What does the market want? What are they interested in? And we had some anecdotal ideas, and that's what we built. But then when we really tried to take it to market, which was a couple of years in, that's when we discovered, oh, there really isn't a market here. So didn't matter that we had a great dev team, produced great software quickly. We were missing the balance there of the business opportunity and validating it's there, right? I think kind of back to what I mentioned before about revenue and profits or stability and throughput, like you have to have a balance to assess your impact. You might have a great business opportunity, but if you can't produce quality software fast, you'll never realize that business opportunity. But on the flip side, you might have the ability to produce quality software quickly, but if you don't test and get feedback from the market early and often, you won't discover until it's too late, till you've invested a lot of money that there's nothing there. There's no opportunity there. DORA can't tell you all of that, nor is it trying to.
I want to shift gears a little bit and transition to talk from, to talk more about, less about measurement and more about developer experience. And we have a bunch of questions that I'm going to try to get to in leave at least 10 minutes. But, let's talk a little bit about developer experience and tooling. So, Don, maybe you can start us off with what's the last tool that you introduced internally? How did you measure the impact, and how did you introduce that? How did you came about this tool?
Sure. We most recently rolled out both GitHub Copilot and AWS Code Whisperer. The only metrics I've seen so far are provided by Microsoft on, Copilot, which is the number of prompts and the number of suggestions accepted. I haven't seen an impact on our DORA metrics due to Copilot usage, but the stats I've seen is we have like an 80% suggestion acceptance rate for Copilot, which I think is good. And anecdotally, I've heard from many of our engineers that they like working with GitHub Copilot. So there's a developer satisfaction thing there going on. As far as platforms and tooling, we've had a DevOps team in the past, but a big change for us this year is to move from what I call DevOps in name only to actually practicing those philosophies and principles of DevOps. And as we mature in that area this year, I do expect to see a positive impact to our DORA metrics. If we're doing DevOps well, there's a lot of automation that is built into our process, and we're going to see the benefits of that, I think, easily in the metrics.
Awesome. Jonathan, any tools that come in mind? How do you think about developer experience in the organization?
So Copilot is also one for sure, like my last company was experimented with, but I'll throw another one out there, which is more of a collaboration tool called Gather. It's an interesting one. It's actually the best tool I've seen to try to simulate that in-person experience in a remote first company. So I've thought Gather is a very interesting tool because I saw so many experience and productivity benefits to working together in like a team room. So that's one that's on my radar as interesting. I mean, developer experience and developer delivery productivity, both I think are judgment-based metrics. You have to ask people their experience. You have to have your experts measuring delivery productivity. So, and I don't think that's what DORA measures. So I'm not surprised that you're not seeing anything in DORA metrics from those. But I Gather, I think is a fun one because it hits both the experience because of the collaboration effect and productivity because people are getting better connected.
So Jonathan, let me challenge you there. So you kind of said that essentially you're looking for the team's feedback, and you know, if the opinions are strong, you essentially adopt this tool. You know, for maybe a $5 or maybe $20, you know, Copilot that works. But I guess when you're talking about a tool that's a little more expensive, you're probably looking for some kind of more tangible ROI. Is that the case? And if so, then, kind of how do you reconcile that?
So when I say judgment-based metric, I mean, it still can be converted to a metric. Like it's say, hey, how much do you estimate this tool increased your productivity? Is it like 1%, 5%, or 10%? And that is a way of converting judgment into a metric. So if I'm having the team experiment with a tool, and mostly they're coming back and saying, I estimate it's a 10% productivity improvement, that to me is my return on investment estimate right there. It's like 10% of the engineering cost is how much this product is worth. And so that is very tangible off of judgment-based information.
Got it. Okay, super helpful. We're going to shift gears a little bit because I want to get to questions. So, but Rob, I know you have a great story of the time you were at Uber and kind of touching into productivity and efficiency. So maybe you can just share a little bit the story of Uber developer productivity in 2016 to, I guess, 2021.
It was a long journey. I joined in 2015 and stayed there about 6 or 7 years. And at different points, there was different levels of developer satisfaction and productivity. And it became a real primary focus the last 3 or so years I was there. And I think the big thing, we ended up seeing a bunch of these throughput metrics triple. And seeing lead time shrink substantially, seeing developer satisfaction go up substantially and things like that. And it wasn't any one tool, but it was really a focus on providing developers with the various tools and documentation that they needed to be able to do their job quickly and easily. The components that I remember offhand were really robust documentation that was in a developer platform, close to the code you were working on. So it made it easy to immediately find documentation that was related or something that you probably would want to see without having to go into Google Drive and do a bunch of different searching to hopefully find something. And, you know, you find a search string and there's an 8-year-old document and a 2-year-old document. It becomes a little difficult to really get to the truth there. So documentation was really important. We provided a bunch of tooling around deploys and rollbacks. And I think that allowed us to do canary deploys, see how things were going, easily roll back. And that made it very easy to take risks, for lack of a better term, because you were able to write something quickly, do a canary rollout to 5, 10, 15, 25%, continue to watch the error rate. So we had really good logs and error reporting and stuff like that. And if at any point you had to hit the abort button, it was literally a single click, everything rolled back, deployed, and you were able to kind of reassess based on the data you saw. The other thing was essentially development environments. By the time I left, I want to say we had about 2,400 different microservices, hundreds of different databases globally and things like that. And it started to become very, very difficult to do any meaningful development or testing before you started deploying, just because, again, the call chain could go through 100 different services and data stores and things like that. So Uber invested a lot in cloud-based development environments that were essentially click a button, get an environment. For the most part, it looked and felt like production. We never got 100% there just based on the complexity and size of everything. But it drastically reduced the number of bugs we found in production, gave people a lot more confidence on the things that they were developing and rolling out, which means developers were happier. We were able to move fastly because we could fail quickly and roll back if anything negative happened. And so it was kind of a suite of different things once the company decided to focus on it that really, really paid dividends. It was a multi-year journey, and we certainly got some things wrong along the way. But at the end of the day, it was a really, really positive push. And there were about, I don't want to say 120 engineers on the developer experience team. So it was a significant investment as well from Uber. But when you're a $70 billion company, I think that's, you can kind of make that make sense. So
Yeah, awesome. I mean, the dev pod sounds super interesting, and I know it's also related to like what you do today. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about DevZero, what you do today, maybe even show us.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, based on the context I just shared, both Devo, my co-founder, who you've seen in the chat, and myself were really, really happy with environments like that. I also went to Meta after that, and they had a similar on-demand instances where click a button, get a Facebook running in your own cloud-based development environment, and start writing code within literal minutes. And so him and I started thinking a lot about why this wasn't a platform and product that people could just buy. And so that's where the genesis of DevZero essentially. So we provide cloud-based environments that are ideally symmetric to production, and really start to give you a glimpse of dev pod and on-demand instances that, you know, multi-billion or almost trillion-dollar companies can invest in. So that's what we're focused on right now. We've been around about 2 years, and seen some really strong traction with customers and things like that. We're close to time, but I'm happy to give just a very, very quick demo in case people are interested to see what it looks like. Okay, I think Shani just have to click a button.
Yeah, I think as soon as you there, then here we go. Perfect.
So what you're looking at is our dashboard here. And I'll give the very core flow as you would get started. So I'm going to use Facebook React. It's the easiest one to kind of demo with. You would create a new recipe, which is essentially what we call our blueprints and configurations for a workspace. I just paste in that URL. What we're doing at this point is introspecting the repository, and you can see we've generated essentially a configuration for that workspace. So you can see updating some mapped packages, installing Node, making sure Yarn's installed, and going through and based on what we've seen inside of the repository, building out an initial configuration for you so you can get started. Goal is to get you 85–90% there. Almost any really meaningful use case takes a little extra massaging to get there, but the recipe is really extensible, so that makes it easy. This point, click save, let's do React demo. And here it's going to build. This normally takes about 2 minutes, so I won't spend too much time just waiting around and looking at logs with everyone. But essentially, we're building the container using build kit to give you, again, the environment based on that configuration. And then we are deploying that to our infrastructure and wrapping it in everything you need to be able to connect, so network connectivity and various things like that. I did this right before, so this is the exact same flow that I just showed. For ease of demo, I'll use the web ID, but you can easily connect with our CLI to VS Code or just raw through the terminal. But I'll copy that. Oh, I authenticated previously, so we're in. You can see all the source codes here. And if I just quickly open up a terminal, you can see.
Rob, I think we're not seeing that part of the screen, so maybe you have a separate monitor or something.
Oh, it's tabs only. Okay, hold on. I'll do this again real quick. Thought I was sharing the window. Apologies. There we go. That should work. So yeah, I'm inside the web browser based VS Code, just showing yarn-v, node-v. Everything's installed. I would, at this point, do a yarn install, and it would run through and install the packages, and I'm off to the races to be able to write code. And here you can see the code that was in that repository. So yeah, that's a very quick demo in the name of making sure we get to questions. But
Awesome. So sounds like one, the ramp up time to get a person on a project is literally minutes as opposed to hours and days of like debugging stuff, installing stuff. And the second thing is just kind of the ability to get robust resources, which typically your local machine doesn't scale unless like you have top of the art M3, yeah, okay, that's super cool. There's some great questions, so I want to try to get to at least a few of those questions. So I'm gonna pick one person and let's try to stick to like 1 minute. So Ash is asking, how do you measure productivity of a Scrum team? Don, maybe you want to take that?
Sure. How do you measure productivity of the Scrum team? Well, I mean, I want to say you can infer a lot of that from DORA metrics, right? If the Scrum teams has a high throughput and high stability, they're obviously doing things right. They're doing things well. But of course, within a Scrum team, there's some really important things to be paying attention to. I think measuring velocity, again, only within the context of that one Scrum team. Don't compare it to other teams, anything like that. It's misleading, it's not useful. But if the team, and as a manager, don't be looking at a velocity for a team and telling them, improve your velocity. Because you'll just game those metrics. They're too easy to game. But as a team, if you're really interested in how do we improve as a team, measuring velocity is really valuable, right? And looking at, how long, why did this story of this 5-pointer, let's say, take as long as it did? How can we make that go faster, right? Those are really important metrics, I think, to be measuring and tracking improvement in as a team.
Cool. Jonathan, maybe you can take the next one. So Owen is asking how effective or feasible is it to measure planned roadmap delivery efficiency while being agile to adopt to the feedback? So I guess kind of how do you balance between roadmap and maybe technical depth and addressing operational issues along the way? So stability, etc.
So the best way to do this is really just reserving a certain amount of time for the unpredictable. Like at Axon, my current company, we call it our service pay budget. We have a percentage of our bandwidth that's just allocated to that kind of stuff that we know we won't be able to predict ahead of time. That is a very good technique. A harder technique is getting authorization for that budget. And that's where, as much as you can articulate the business value in technical debt projects is going to be your secret there, which is a longer discussion. So I'll stop at that short answer.
Awesome. I'll take two final questions. I'll leave the last one, which I think is great. But just prior to that, Don, I mean, it's talking a little bit about code reviews. And so you mentioned peer programming, but, kind of PR reviews is definitely a pain point, I think, for many organizations that I've talked to. And so people don't always take it seriously. There's not always, a timely response. So, kind of how do you, any thoughts around kind of how to improve the code review and, does peer programming address that?
Yes. Well, if anyone thinks I'm a DORA zealot, I'm even more of a pair programming zealot or software teaming. And this software teaming is a concept we discovered in the past year and a half or so. And we now have, I think, 4 of our engineering teams using software teaming or mob programming. That's where the whole team is working together at the same time on the same problem in the same space. And you get all of the benefits of pair programming plus, right? Because the whole team's at it. And it's been really amazing. Yeah, I agree. PR reviews are troublesome. There's a lot of latency or lag built in. Like I submit a request for PR and then who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? A lot of latencies, is shown there. And that's something that DORA metrics don't capture, right? Because DORA is focused on what comes after the code is ready. This is the prep work, right? And so that's another good measure. Like how long does it take to get a PR done? How do we improve that? How do we shrink that timeline? Pair programming, you get the PR for free because you both worked on it. Software teaming, same thing. You get it for free. And suddenly you've removed latency out of your whole process just by working in a different way. Plus you get other benefits. You get the cross training. You get more minds looking at a problem and looking at the code and better solutions. You get higher quality, fewer bugs. We saw this early on in my previous job when I really dove into pair programming. Our quality went up dramatically just by having 2 people looking at the problems and the testing and the solutions. So I highly recommend those things. I could talk for a whole nother seminar about that.
I imagine I do have one last question for you that I feel like is going to be an interesting story. How did you land on DORA and kind of the value of it?
We were doing a book club on modern software engineering by Dave Farley. And he was talking about these metrics from the Accelerate book. And so I went and looked at the Accelerate book, and that's where, learned about DORA, and I looked into that organization and looked at the research they were doing with these, thousands of companies and tens of thousands of engineering teams. And that's kind of how I got to it and began to understand what it was they were doing, what these metrics were showing, and then started to think about how can I apply that here. And again, once it clicked for me, I just had to have those metrics.
Awesome. I know we're way over time, otherwise I would ask the Jonathan and Rob also the same question, but I really want to thank you guys. I think this has been a lively discussion. The fact that there were so many questions, I think is a strong evidence to that, and sure we can probably spend another 2 hours just talking about the same stuff, but thanks again. Have a great rest of the day. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but we'll try to follow up offline. And thanks again, Rob. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Jonathan. And
Thank you.
have a great rest of the day again.
Great fun.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.